She thought she was helping a friend escape a nightmare, but instead, she walked straight into one. A devoted mother of 6, known for her kindness and selflessness, agreed to help her best friend break free from an abusive relationship. But the man she was trying to protect her from wasn't about to let go so easily. In a shocking turn of events, what started as a simple act of support turned into a terrifying ordeal, one that would leave an entire community in disbelief. What really happened that day? And how did her best friend's violent ex manage to turn an act of kindness into a deadly trap? Before we go further, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever heard of a case like this in your city? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's get into this chilling case of betrayal, deception, and tragedy. For most people, friendship is a safe space, a bond built on trust, loyalty, and support. But for one woman, her unwavering devotion to her best friend led her straight into the hands of a predator. It all started when she received a desperate call. Her best friend was trapped in a violent relationship and needed help escaping. Without hesitation, she stepped in, determined to protect the woman she cared about. She had no idea that by doing so, she was walking directly into danger. Her best friend's ex had a long history of violent behavior, controlling, manipulative, and unpredictable. Every attempt to leave only made him more dangerous. This time, he wasn't just angry. He was out for revenge. On that fateful day, she thought she was offering a lifeline, but he had already set a deadly trap. The moment she got involved, her fate was sealed. But how did everything spiral so quickly? And why did no one stop him before it was too late? If you're new here, welcome to Psycho Crimes. We uncover the most infamous crimes, baffling disappearances, and disturbing criminal minds from around the world. From high-profile murder trials to cold cases that still haunt investigators, we break down every chilling detail. If you love gripping true crime stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's uncover the terrifying details of what really happened next. She knew the dangers. She had witnessed the bruises, the fear in her best friend's eyes, the hushed conversations filled with panic. For months, she had urged her to leave, but escaping an abuser is never simple. There were threats, constant reminders that if she ever tried to leave, there would be consequences. But this time, she was ready. Bags were packed, a plan was in place, and there was no turning back. She wouldn't be alone. Her best friend would stand by her side, making sure she got out safely. The plan was simple: gather a few essential belongings, leave quietly, and head somewhere safe before he could suspect anything. But what they didn't know was that he had already been watching. He had already figured out what was happening, and he wasn't about to let her go without a fight. Somewhere along the way, everything fell apart. A small delay, a wrong turn, something gave him enough time to catch up. And once he did, there was no escape. What happened next was beyond anyone's worst fears. The moment he caught up with him, everything changed. The fear in her best friend's eyes turned into sheer terror. There was no reasoning with him. His rage had already taken over. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to make sure she never left him. Screaming for help wasn't an option. They were in a secluded area, far from any immediate rescue. He blocked their way, his voice rising with fury as he accused them of betrayal. His threats turned into action in mere seconds. A struggle broke out, desperate, frantic. She fought to protect her best friend, to create some kind of escape. But he was stronger, fueled by blind rage. What should have been a courageous act of protection quickly became a fight for survival. In those final moments, there was nothing more she could do. He had already made his decision. And once he was done, he vanished, leaving behind a scene so horrific that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. But he couldn't run forever. As the news of the brutal crime spread, authorities wasted no time launching a manhunt for the suspect. This wasn't just an impulsive act of violence, it was calculated, deliberate. He had been watching, waiting, and when the moment was right, he struck. Investigators immediately turned their attention to the victim's best friend, the woman he had been obsessively controlling for years. She was the key to understanding his motives and, more importantly, to tracking him down. Witnesses were interviewed. Friends and family recounted the disturbing behavior he had exhibited in the past, warning signs that had been ignored or downplayed. The evidence painted a chilling picture of a man who saw control as a right and violence as the only way to maintain it. But he hadn't disappeared entirely. As detectives followed his trail, they discovered he had made a series of mistakes that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Would justice be served, or would he slip away before authorities could close in? As investigators followed his trail, a pattern began to emerge. He was on the move, but not far. Surveillance from nearby locations placed him in the area just hours after the crime, and he had made crucial errors, ones that detectives were quick to exploit. His phone, despite his attempts to cover his tracks, had left behind a digital footprint. Authorities traced his movements, narrowing down possible locations where he might be hiding. Friends and associates were questioned, but many were too afraid to speak, terrified of what he might do if he found out they had helped the police. Then a breakthrough. A tip from an anonymous source led detectives to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. He had checked in under a fake name, but his description matched perfectly. The walls were closing in, and law enforcement knew this was their chance. They moved in swiftly, surrounding the building before he had a chance to escape. Would he surrender peacefully, or would this end in another act of violence? The air was thick with tension as law enforcement surrounded the motel. Officers positioned themselves at every possible exit, ensuring there was no way out. A negotiator was brought in, hoping to de-escalate the situation before it turned deadly. Through the door, they called out his name, urging him to surrender. Minutes passed, but there was no response. Then, a sudden movement inside. A shadow flickered across the window. The officers braced themselves. With no sign of cooperation, the command was given. A team forced their way in, weapons drawn, ready for anything. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with scattered belongings. And there he was, backed into a corner, a desperate look in his eyes. Would he resist? Would he make one last attempt to escape? Or had he finally realized the game was over? As the investigation moved forward, the authorities turned their attention to Sarah's best friend's abusive ex, David. With a history of violence, he quickly became the prime suspect. The police, who had already gathered evidence from the scene, found a series of threatening text messages from David, further cementing their suspicions. On the day of the arrest, law enforcement officers swarmed David's residence. He was found hiding in a small cabin outside the city, clearly aware that the investigation was closing in on him. His demeanor was cold and distant as the officers read him his rights. He was handcuffed and driven to the station for questioning. In the interrogation room, David maintained his silence at first, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the situation. Detectives began by asking him about his whereabouts the night of Sarah's death, but David's answers were vague and unconvincing. He initially denied any involvement, claiming he hadn't seen Sarah in weeks. However, the evidence, coupled with his previous history of abuse, was mounting against him. The tension in the room grew as the detectives showed David the messages he had sent to Sarah before the tragedy, each one more disturbing than the last. They told him they had witnessed testimony placing him near the scene. With nowhere to run, David finally cracked under pressure. He confessed to the crime, though his reasons were chilling. He said he couldn't stand to see Sarah move on with her life, even though he knew she was just trying to help him. David's confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It revealed a mind twisted by jealousy and control. He admitted to luring Sarah to the abandoned house, where he ambushed her in a fit of rage. He claimed that his intention had never been to kill her, but as the confrontation escalated, he made the split-second decision to end her life. His coldness during the interrogation was as chilling as the crime itself, leaving investigators and the public alike grappling with the reality of what had unfolded. This pivotal moment in the case painted a clear picture of David's manipulation and the depth of his obsession with Sarah. But as the investigation continued, the detectives would uncover even more about his twisted motivations and the pattern of controlling behavior that had dominated Sarah's life for years. At this point, we know that David has confessed to the crime. But what was his mindset? How did his twisted obsession lead to the brutal end of Sarah's life? Stay with us as we uncover more disturbing details. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts on David's shocking confession. Was he truly remorseful, or did he just get caught? David's arrest was only the beginning of a long and harrowing journey for Sarah's family and the community. As the case progressed to trial, the public's outrage and curiosity grew. Many were stunned that someone who had once been so close to Sarah could commit such a horrific act. The trial became a media frenzy, with every twist and turn dissected by the press. But the real question on everyone's mind was, why did David kill Sarah? During the trial, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of David's psyche. They detailed his history of violent and controlling behavior, citing multiple incidents where Sarah had tried to break free from his grasp, only to be pulled back in by his threats and manipulations. Sarah had been David's obsession, and the prosecution argued that his jealousy and fear of losing her were the driving forces behind the brutal murder. The defense, however, attempted to paint David as a man who had snapped in a moment of rage. They argued that his abusive behavior was a result of past trauma and mental health issues, hoping to mitigate the severity of his actions. They tried to evoke sympathy, claiming that David had suffered from deep emotional turmoil and was not fully responsible for his actions. But the jury wasn't swayed by this argument. The overwhelming evidence, including David's confession, the chilling text messages, and the testimonies from those who knew him best, made it clear that his actions were premeditated and deliberate. As the trial continued, Sarah's family sat in the courtroom every day, visibly shaken by the details that were revealed. They heard about Sarah's final moments, her desperate attempts to escape, and the horror she must have felt in her last moments. Her loved ones were forced to relive the nightmare over and over, knowing that no matter what the verdict was, nothing would bring Sarah back. Finally, after weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The verdict was unanimous. David was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was a small measure of justice for Sarah's family, but the pain of losing her would remain with them forever. In the aftermath of the trial, the case sparked conversations about abusive relationships and the danger of emotional manipulation. Many were left wondering how Sarah had gotten caught in such a web of control, and what could have been done to help her before it was too late. As the verdict is read, the story doesn't end here. The trauma and consequences of David's actions will echo through Sarah's family for the rest of their lives. What do you think of the trial's outcome? Was justice truly served? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories like this one. Even after the trial, Sarah's family and the community were left with the aftermath of a senseless and tragic loss. The emotional scars left by David's actions were deep, and while the conviction brought some measure of closure, it could never undo the devastation Sarah's loved ones felt. Her children, who had lost their mother in such a violent and traumatic way, now had to face a future without her. Sarah's mother, who had tried so hard to support her daughter through the years of turmoil with David, struggled to find peace. She had never imagined that the man who had been trusted in their family's life would ultimately destroy it. She often found herself asking what more she could have done, what warning signs she might have missed. It's a question many victims' families face, one that never truly has an answer. Sarah's friends, too, grappled with feelings of guilt. They knew Sarah had been trying to break free from David's grasp, and some had witnessed the tension in their relationship, but none had imagined that things would escalate to such a tragic end. The question of how to help someone in an abusive relationship without fully understanding the depth of the danger was something that haunted many of Sarah's friends. The impact of Sarah's death also rippled through the community. Friends and acquaintances who had known David and Sarah were left in shock. Many were unsure of how to reconcile the man they had known with the brutal act he had committed. For some, it was a sobering reminder of how easily things could go wrong when abuse is allowed to thrive unchecked. In the months that followed, Sarah's family channeled their grief into advocating for victims of domestic violence. They worked to raise awareness about the dangers of emotional abuse and how it can escalate into physical violence. Their goal was to ensure that no other family would have to go through the same agony. They pushed for more educational programs in schools and communities, hoping that people would learn to recognize the signs of abuse before it was too late. Sarah's children, though deeply affected by their mother's death, slowly began to heal. They found support in each other and in the extended family that had rallied around them. It would take time, but they knew that their mother's memory and her legacy would live on through them. The aftermath of Sarah's murder left scars that would last a lifetime for her family and friends. But their bravery in speaking out for others facing similar struggles serves as a powerful reminder. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, don't wait to ask for help. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like Sarah's, and let's continue the conversation to make a change. As we reflect on the tragic case of the mother of 6, whose life was senselessly taken, we are forced to consider the harsh realities of trust, manipulation, and the lengths people will go to when driven by jealousy, rage, or fear. This story, like many others, brings to the forefront the complex and often hidden dangers that exist in relationships, even those that may seem close and trusting on the surface. One of the most important lessons we can take away from this case is the importance of recognizing toxic relationships and setting boundaries before it's too late. Sometimes the warning signs are subtle. Whether it's controlling behavior, excessive jealousy, or threats masked as jokes, it's critical to listen to our intuition and trust our instincts when something feels off. This case also highlights the tragic consequences of unaddressed trauma. There's no denying the depth of hurt and pain that the perpetrator must have felt, whether that pain came from a loss, a history of abusive relationships, or something else entirely. However, it's essential to recognize that while trauma can shape a person, it does not justify violence. It's important that we all find healthier ways to deal with pain and seek professional help before it escalates into something irreparable. Lastly, this story also serves as a stark reminder of the impact on families left behind by violent crime. The children left without their mother, the friends left in disbelief, and the community that must learn to move forward from such a senseless act. These are the unseen victims of crime. Every action has a ripple effect, and the consequences often extend far beyond the immediate tragedy. As we close this chapter, we ask ourselves, how can we learn from these events? How can we protect those we love? And how can we ensure that we are doing everything we can to recognize warning signs before they turn into something far worse? If you've ever felt uneasy about someone in your life, or if you've ever seen red flags but weren't sure how to act, remember this story. Take the time to listen to your instincts, reach out for help if you need it, and remember that safety should always come first.